Welcome to Birth as We Know It, a podcast that is dedicated to recognizing the many different ways that birth unfolds. I am your host, Kiona Nessenbaum. I have experienced birth as a doula, a student midwife, a birth assistant, and as a mother of 3 amazing children of my own. After attending over 140 births, I've realized that each birth experience is truly unique. So make sure you subscribe and join me as we are guided through many different birth experiences through the lens of the storyteller. Please be aware that some of these stories can be triggering to hear. So feel free to pause, take a breath, and come back and listen whenever you're ready. With that said, let's prep ourselves to dive deep and get detailed about what really happens in the birth space. As a reminder, this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and has no intention of giving or replacing any medical advice. All advice that is given on the podcast is from the personal experiences of the storytellers. All medical or health-related questions should be directed to your licensed provider. Before we dive into this episode today, I want to give a huge shout out to all of the Birth As We Know It podcast listeners that are part of the Facebook group. And the reason why I want to give you a shout out is simply because I love and appreciate you. I really love our engagement that we have on our Friday questions because we get to discuss things that we have similar responses to, as well as things that we have different responses to. And if you listening now want to be part of the engagement, you can go to birthasweknowitpodcast.com/community. We would love to have you there and have you part of the crew. Now, when it comes to today's episode, we are speaking with Jeanelle, and Jeanelle is sharing her 2 unassisted home birth experiences in Australia. And we also hear from her partner just a little bit, but it's great to hear his voice and get his opinion as well. And if you like this episode, I highly suggest that after you're done, tune into episode 42 with Ashley Winning, where she shares her birth experience of an unassisted home birth in Australia as well. Now, the thing that makes Ashley's story different is she actually has an unassisted home birth after already having had 2 cesareans. So her story is quite different. But all right, let's go ahead and dive into today's episode with Jeanelle. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Birth As We Know It podcast. Today, I will be interviewing Jeanelle Harvey-Bridges, who is the owner of the Intuitive Parent, which is dedicated to supporting moms in their early parenthood. So, Jeanelle, welcome and thank you. You're going to be sharing your 2 birth stories with us today.
Hi, Kitty. Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about birth. I'm so excited for this.
I am so ready to dive into this with you because when I was reading your guest request form, there's just so much goodness in that brief description that you gave me, and I want to hear all the details. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start off with conception of baby number 1. So baby number 1, were you surprised? All the things.
Yeah. So my firstborn, he's now 2. He was very much planned. I've got a history of polycystic ovarian syndrome, so PCOS. And I was told that I wouldn't be able to fall pregnant naturally ever, might not even be able to have kids because, cycles weren't regular, hormones were all over the place, you name it. So my conception journey started at 16, just because I was like, I've always known I wanted to be a mum. So when my husband and I were finally ready, obviously I wasn't ready at 16, but when I was finally ready to start having kids about 2 or 3 years ago, we did all the things, got all the blood tests, made sure that we were on track. And I'm a registered nurse, so I wanted to do everything by the book. So we ended up going through the ovulation induction route with him and being told that we can go ovulation induction, unlikely to work, but we'll try it anyway. And thank God that we actually were successful first go. And that was kind of the start of things. I had had a miscarriage, an unplanned miscarriage, about 6 months before I fell pregnant with him. And that was a big surprise because I actually didn't know I was pregnant until I was having that miscarriage, so I was just like, oh man, this is the beginning of my infertility. Thank goodness it wasn't. So that was the conception of him, and that led me on a very interesting journey, starting very, very clinical and ending very, very unclinical.
Yeah, that's the part I'm excited to hear about because as a registered nurse, you just said you like going by the book. So What were the steps that you took in order to make sure that your pregnancy went well?
So again, doing everything by the book, I wanted to go to the birth center in our local hospital here, which is midwife led, because growing up, I see myself as one of the lucky ones in terms of the example that I was set in my household around the attitude towards birth. I know a lot of women, a lot of my girlfriends grew up with a mum or an auntie or someone who basically scarred them and put major, major fear blocks in their minds, having told their traumatic birth stories. But my mum, having had a very intervention-led birth, like inductions, episiotomies, you name it, she always talked really positively about her birth and how amazing it is to give birth. And I was actually at my sister's birth when I was 7. So I had a very, very positive experience of birth, and I wanted to create that for myself, having heard all the trauma that was around birth. And so that's why I was like, right, I need to go to the birthing center. I need to have a very natural birth. Like, that's what I want. I don't need to, but that's what I want. And so, yeah, so I applied for that. Now, here in Australia, we have a lot of red tape when it comes to a natural physiological birth. Why? I do not know. And I don't know if I'll ever find out. But I had to go, because of my history of PCOS, I had to have a lot of testing at 16 weeks, including the gestational diabetes test, the GTT. If you've had that test, it's an awful test. It's disgusting. A sugary drink you have to drink, and then they test your blood sugar. It's basically like a stress test for your body. And putting a woman's body under stress like that is, I don't know why we do it. I don't know. It's just one of those things. Again, not something that I'm here to solve. But lo and behold, I failed the stress test by 0.1 millimole. I'm not sure. There's a different measurement you use in America, I'm fairly sure, but I'm not sure how that translates. But it's literally 0.1 of a millimole per liter that I failed my fasting blood sugar test with. And then that immediately disqualified me from the birthing center, because now I was a high-risk pregnancy. So at 16 weeks before the placenta was established, and their whole argument is that gestational diabetes is caused by the placenta causing insulin resistance. So anyway, it's ridiculous. Anyway, so that as soon as I was disqualified from the birthing center, I went down into a spiral of grief. I was then told that, right, so you've got gestational diabetes. By the way, you've got a week to get your blood sugars under control with diet and exercise. Otherwise, you're ending on insulin. So I was like, okay, well, a week's not a long time. So, of course, I ended on insulin. That meant that my diagnosis meant that I had to go in for monthly ultrasounds. I had to go in for monthly endocrinologist appointments. And I was also told that my baby is likely to be big. I have to be induced at 38 weeks, and I will probably end up in a C-section. And if I don't follow these rules, there's a good chance my baby will die.
Mm-hmm.
Being told that, again, not even halfway through your pregnancy, I was livid is probably an understatement. I was so shocked and so angry, so frustrated at everything, that I hated my pregnancy from that point forward. Up until that point, I was excited. I was like, obviously, my dream of becoming a mum was coming true. And then being told all these things, I was like grieving the birth that I had envisioned for as long as I could remember. And so this is where my journey of going from wanting to do everything by the book to now I'm a rebel started. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So just a clarifying question. So you are saying that because you have a history of PCOS, your provider suggested that you get your glucose tolerance test, your GTT, at 16 weeks.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. So that's one of the criteria in the birthing centers here is that you basically have to have the perfect pregnancy to end up in the birthing center. Otherwise, you're disqualified because the midwives allegedly are not equipped to manage that high-risk pregnancy.
Yeah, that gives me all kinds of feelings.
Yep. Not surprised.
Yeah, because here, as a birth worker, former student midwife, I was an out-of-hospital birth midwife. So I was not practicing as a certified nurse midwife, but in an out-of-hospital setting, we have that requirement as well, right? Where you have to meet a certain requirement to be considered safe to birth in an out-of-hospital setting. Now, we also use the glucose tolerance test as a deterring factor, but it wasn't done at 16 weeks. 16 weeks is 10 weeks prior to the earliest time you should be taking it.
Yeah.
And if someone does cross that threshold of saying that they are officially diagnosed with gestational diabetes, the midwives that I have worked with, and I would like to say that I'm extremely lucky because not all midwives are like this, the midwives that I worked with would allow that client to stay in care if they could control their blood sugars with diet and exercise. The only time that they officially risked out of care was when they did need to do insulin, but there were still options to be cared for prenatally by your midwife and then transferred to a hospital setting to have continuity of care. That's interesting to me. And I am so intrigued because, there are so many similarities, yet differences between Australia and the US.
Yeah, yeah. So, look, when it comes to the GTT here, is we usually test at 28 weeks. That is the standard, and I think that's close to an international standard, actually. But yeah, so because of that PCOS label, I got you need to do a GTT, and now I've got a GD label.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's ridiculous. And when I started my grief process, is what I call it, I was grieving that birth. I went into a really dark place where I was like, well, maybe I just shouldn't have a baby. I was just, it was just not a good time. It was really, really intense grief because I was like, I don't want blades near me. I don't want them near me. I mean, obviously, some women do have C-sections. They do have episiotomies, and sometimes it's genuinely needed. I am never going to say that the medical profession is the big bad wolf and you should never, ever go see it. But because I'm a researcher, right? Not just a medical professional, I need to know how to look for evidence, but as a person, non-nurse, I'm also, I love research. I love getting that evidence. So that took me on a journey of evidence seeking, of how am I going to manage my gestational diabetes so that I can have the birth that I want. And it led me down to discover that within the last, 5 years at the time, so within the last 7 to 8 years, we have had some major changes in the thresholds of what is considered a diabetic in pregnancy versus not. So it got changed from and again, I'm so sorry, I don't know the conversion into the units you use to measure blood sugar, but in Australia, the threshold used to be 5.5 millimole for fasting, and then there's a couple of other thresholds for when you're no longer fasting as part of the GTT test. And then in the last 8 years, it was reduced down to 5.1 is the fasting level. And mine, of course, was 5.2. So, yeah, I mean, it's just interesting because what I found alongside that little nugget was that since they changed the threshold, they've had a 75% increase in diagnosis of pregnant women. So is it real? I don't know. Is it not real? Don't know. I didn't do the research myself, but the numbers to me spoke to itself, and I was like, this is ridiculous.
And that led you down the path of making a really big decision.
It really did. It really did. So once I had grieved, once I had found out, okay, look, this is ridiculous. I'm now on insulin. I'm being told that I have to be induced. I'm having to go for these growth scans, and every time I go in, they're like, oh, he's a big boy. I turned to my husband and I asked, hey, how about we reconsider home birth? And why I say reconsider is when I first fell pregnant, I asked him, how about we do a home birth? Like, a home birth would be amazing. He's like, absolutely not. This is our first baby. Neither of us know what on earth we're doing. No. And I was like, okay, I'll go to the birth center. Obviously got disqualified from the birth center, and I was like, let's think about home birth again. And he doesn't identify with this, but I like to think that as a result of him seeing me grieve my birth that I thought I would have, I think his heart was a bit softened. And so he was like, fine, do some research, see if you can find a midwife who would take you on, and then we'll go from there. And at this point, I was about 22, 24 weeks pregnant. And so obviously, not obviously, but unfortunately, most of the midwives who would take on a high risk, quote unquote, high risk pregnancy were either fully booked or way out of our price range. And obviously, those who were available just wouldn't take me on because I have this GD on insulin label. And I was like, well, there's this thing called free birth that I came across. And I was like, this is bizarre. People birth without any help and it's normal? Like, what? And so, again, being a researcher, I looked into it. Like, I went deep and I was watching birth videos and like free birth videos, and I was learning about physiological birth and what that actually looked like. And, wait, coach pushing isn't a thing? And wait, like, you don't have to have all these things. And it was just this whole new world opened up for me because, again, my mum never talked about physiological birth because she had inductions and she had episiotomies. Even though it was positive for her, I didn't know that was possible to not have at least a little bit of intervention, that birth is inherently dangerous is what the thought that I had. Like, there's always a level of danger to it. And so when I found out free birth was a thing, I was like, this is pretty cool. This is like my sliver of hope. Like, I could have the birth that I've dreamed of. So I presented it to my husband and I was like, look, I've done my research. These are the really red flags. These are the genuine reasons that we would need a hospital or a medical professional for. And here are this is how often it happens and this is how you would manage it. And I actually created a whole folder of like A to Z of the dream for my birth and my labor and the process of birth and labor, that in case he needed anything, he would be able to refer to that. And he turned to me and said, okay, I trust you. And that was a big thing. And it's been a big thing since, because I've now had my second baby about 8 weeks ago. And trust from your birth support, in my case, that was my husband, was huge. It's just a major mindset shift of wait, someone trusts me to know what's good for my body after being told for the last 22, 24 weeks how broken my body is and how incapable it is of looking after the life that it's growing inside. The doubt that placed, and then it just kind of washed away in many ways when I was told, hey, I trust you. So yeah, that set me on, right, we're free birthing. Okay, let's do this. And again, my nursing side still wanted to keep the rules in some way, I guess. So I still went for my appointments. I still got my, ultrasounds, and I basically led the hospital to believe that I would be birthing with them. So when 38 weeks rolled around, they were like, right, so we're booking you in for your induction. And I declined. And they then listed all of the risks of declining, and I had to go on an alternative care plan, and again threatened dead babies and all these things. And I'll never forget this one OB quoted a study saying, if you decline induction and you go past 38 or 40 weeks, your risk of stillbirth doubles as a gestational diabetic. I had read that study and I said, oh, you're talking about the study where the risk doubles from 0.01%, right? Yep. So I was like, it's okay. I read that study. I'm happy with those statistics. I'm happy to take that risk. And they were shocked that I had firstly read that study, and also that I would be willing to take that risk. That's really dangerous of me. They're like, you're a nurse, you should know that these statistics are significant. And I was like, I agree, they are significant, but I feel safer not going down the induction pathway. Like, for me, it was a big thing that I did not want a cascade of interventions. I did not want it. Most of us, when we find out we've got something or something's happening in our life, we will seek out a community on social media. And so I was part of many groups of just GD mums, and people would share their birth stories, and it was traumatic after traumatic with the occasional positive one. And I just didn't want that. So yeah, my alternative care plan essentially meant that I had to go for second daily. So every second day I had to go for a CTG scan to make sure that baby wasn't in distress, which the midwives almost every time, they were surprised that I passed my CTG within 10, 20 minutes of being there. They're like, oh, that was quick. Baby is moving so well. And I was like, yes, I know. Oi, oi, oi. So obviously when 40 weeks rolled around, I was 39 and 6, and I was on my second daily CTG at the hospital, and I lost my mucus plug there. And I told them that, and they were like, "All right, so we're admitting you. You're going into labor. We should augment it." And I was like, "No, I'm going home." I had to again listen to their threats of the status of my baby's health. And that, obviously, like, it's a bit of a wearing down scenario where when they had left the room, I turned to my husband and I was in tears, and I was like, am I being selfish? Am I being selfish for wanting this birth to go smoothly, to not go into surgery, to not have synthetic oxytocin, pitocin, all that? I didn't want it. Am I being selfish? Because this is what, and I forgot to mention this, is when I first was diagnosed and finding out all the things that GD meant, I was like, oh no, like I'm putting my own child at high risk of obesity and heart disease and this and that. And so it was just this major thing that I was like, I'm negatively impacting my unborn child, and the pressure and the guilt that came with that was huge. And he said, well, you did your research and you feel fine, right? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, then we'll stick with your plan. And if you decide you want to change your plan, then you change your plan. And it was just, again, that level of trust was just like, okay, yeah. Like, we can always change the plan. Like, that's okay.
And here is Jeanelle's partner, Jackson.
I was against it at first. I didn't really know anything about it. So she kind of explained it, and I trust her. So, yeah, I just kind of gradually came around to it. And, yeah, trust in her. She had a whole booklet for me of like things I could do if things go wrong, what we do there. I knew most of it and we discussed it, but it was just there. It's handy to have.
We did our research. We know what we need to do if something should, for some reason, go wrong. Obviously, we're not planning for it, but sometimes it just happens that way. And so we went home, and so I lost my mucus plug around 1 p.m. and came home around 3:30. I had my first little niggle, and I was like, oh, that's not a Braxton Hicks. That's not a Braxton Hicks. That's something more. So we went for a walk and came back. I did my curb walking. I was like, let's get this going. And by 5 o'clock, I was in established labor, and I had set up my dining room. We'd moved the table and chairs away, and I had my birth pool set up there a few weeks leading up to the point, and we'd had a little fairy light. I did use a TENS machine. As soon as my contractions were kind of regular, I was like, right, like I'll chuck that on. And just labored. It was just, I had a birth sling so I did have a doula. I did have a doula who her main role was to just maintain the birth space. So like birth pool, water would be, good temperature. If we needed any extra towels or what, like just like an extra helping hand or emotional support for my husband more than anything else, because I essentially told them, just let me be, just witness me, basically. And so that's exactly what they did. Is I was laboring for a good, 3-4 hours in my living room, and then I moved to the shower. And the shower was amazing. I love laboring in the shower. I was in there for a good 3-4 hours, and now at the time we had moved in. How pregnant was I? I was maybe 5 months pregnant when we moved into our now home. And so it was and we had built it. So it was very new. So we had new grass out the front to establish that we were watering that heaps. I was in the shower for 3 to 4 hours, and then later on went into the birth pool. So you can imagine our water bill that that quarter. We actually had the department send an extra letter to ask, just check for leaks, because we used a lot of water. But anyway, so I was laboring in the shower for a couple of hours, and as I got out of the shower, I was overwhelmed by the sensations in many ways, but then at the same time I was like actually very, very calm in that I knew what was happening because I had really, really researched it. And by research, that's a very like cold term, but like I really immersed myself in what does it look like, what is happening in my body, and like what are the thoughts I might be having. And so I think I was really well prepared for a first time laboring person. Yeah, so when I got out of the shower, I asked my husband for a cloth. to wipe my face. And he goes, scuffles off, goes and gets it. And as he comes into the room, he wants to help it. And then he dabs me on my face. And that's just when a contraction started. And I'm like, get off. And he's like, oh, geez, sorry. And then afterwards, like, after the contraction, he's like, I'm so sorry. Come here. I want the cloth. And so I grabbed the cloth back. And it was just one of those things that I just didn't want to be touched. Like, it's quite funny because it seems to be a bit of a trend in both my labors so far is, as soon as I get into established labor, I start stripping the layers off of my body. I'll quickly lose my shirt, I'll quickly lose my pants, and then eventually I'll lose everything. And I'm just this naked, pregnant, wild woman just pacing around. And so, it was kind of funny in that sense. And then we still laugh about that. It's just me telling him off for wanting to help me, but then being all apologetic immediately after. And it's just one of those things it's quite crazy how your mind just needs to focus on that one thing right then and there. And it's just, it's really cool. And at that point, I moved to the birth pool. So this was about just before 11 p.m. So I'd been laboring for 6 hours or so. I don't remember much in the birth pool because just before I got in the birth pool, I had gone through transition where I had 2 very, very big vomits. Like I had copious amounts of liquid coming from my body. And at the time I was like, this is a lot, but this is normal. Like I was just able to reassure myself that it's normal. What's happening is okay. It's normal. Got into the birth pool and I was in such a trance at that point where I was just in and out of restful periods where I was like sleepy and then a contraction would come on and I would, be woken up by it. And it got to the point where I was starting to push and I told them I don't want pushing help. Like I just don't want it. So just breathe with me. So we actually, before I went into labor, we had this little exercise where we tested what is my coping mechanism. So we had like this ice test where I put an ice block in my hands and we would like, okay, like what is your reaction to this discomfort? And for a good minute or so. And very quickly we realized that my coping mechanisms were I would either talk, be like, oh, this is so cold, like, oh my goodness, like, oh, la, la. Or I would just be breathing. And so we were like, okay, which one is a bit more resourceful for labor? And so we're like, right, breathing. So Jeanelle, you need to make sure that you're breathing. So I very much focus on my breathing during both my labors is like open jaw, like this is the saying, open jaw, open fanny, like,
Yes.
this is like this, some people have these beautiful birth affirmations. Mine is that. And so, I'm very just aware that, relax your jaw, Jeanelle, you got to do it. Make sure you're breathing, keep your breathing low, like, And so again, we kind of agreed beforehand that if my breathing goes a bit higher pitched and, a bit more tense, that they would come in with lower breathing sounds. And so that really, really helped when I was overwhelmed by pushing. Because obviously that pressure in your perineum, that if you haven't felt it before, it can be quite overwhelming and it's a very unfamiliar sensation. So there was a couple of times where they would come in and just help with the hers and I would go back and I could just tone match them. And it was big for me. Like it was just like, I'm supported, I'm here, I'm safe, everything's good. And so, so I started pushing, I think about an hour and a bit before he was born. So just before 1 a.m. It was quite cool because I've got a birth video of this online I took on my phone. And you can see where like the contraction just before I had my first pushing sensation was just like a contraction. It's like you're breathing through it. It's painful, but you can tell that it, that's happening. The next one, you can hear in my body and my voice how I just could not stop myself from pushing. It's like that. I'm not even going to try and imitate it, but it's essentially just I was breathing. And then next minute there was this major, major urge to push and I just could not help but go into that. And I knew like, okay, my baby is coming. And then after he'd crowned, I actually, I was like prepared, for the ring of fire. And I was like, yeah, okay, there it is. But with him, it was over very, very quickly. And I was just like, I don't know if it was because I was in the birth pool or if it was because I was prepared for it, but I wasn't too fazed by it. What I was fazed by was I was so surprised so after he'd crowned, he was just kind of there for a good minute or so between contractions. And then I had my doula had a GoPro underwater. So I've got, again, a video of him having crowned. And then the next contraction, it was just so amazing. Is he turned, as babies do. It's just they're so involved in their own birth. It just blows my mind. Babies are so smart. Anyway, he turned and fetal ejection just kicked in and he came flying out with the next last little push. And that turning and pushing shocked me. I went from her like breathing to like shrill shrieking of like, what the hell just came out of me? And interestingly, I should just go back, is just before he crowned, I felt a pop, and that's when my waters broke. So my waters didn't break until the very last minute, so maybe 1 or 2 pushes before he was born. And when he came flying out, I obviously grabbed him out of the water, and I just remember saying, "My child, my child." It was so emotional, and yeah, he was perfect, Manuel, my little baby. He was perfect. Like, he was just so peaceful. He did come out and, he shared his voice briefly, but then after that, he was so calm and just kind of like looking at me, looking at the environment. So he was born just after 2.
All right, you guys, I am hopping on here to say very quickly that Jeanelle has given us the opportunity to actually listen to the audio of her birth video. So you are about to dive in to the throes of labor with her for just 3 minutes, and it is the moment which she pushed out her son. And as she mentioned, there was a GoPro, so you will hear a slight change in audio, but it'll pop right back and you will be able to hear all of the emotions that she's talking about. As she cheers herself on, you will hear her speak Afrikaans to herself and her son. She says, almost there, almost there. And after her son is born, she says, my child, my child. And in the end, you hear her say, you are so beautiful, over and over. So let's dive into labor with Jeanelle. As you can hear, that is an extremely emotional moment for Jeanelle and her family. Jeanelle, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now let's go ahead and dive back into the rest of this story.
So I had a 9-hour labor, and that's quite literally half of the expected labor here in our hospitals. Is for a first-time mom, the average labor is around 18 hours. And so it was great. And you know, it was everything that I'd hoped for, right? And then what happened next was really frustrating, because what happened was I was convinced then by a midwife to go into hospital a few hours later, even though everything was fine. Placenta came within 45 minutes. It was essentially a textbook undisturbed birth and labor, and, you know, we were fine. I knew I had a bit of tearing because it was quite painful when I had peed, but I had it in my mind. I'm like, for me, the way I prepared for that was I knew that there's a chance that I would tear, because that's just how it works sometimes. But in my mind, I was like, right, first or second, I would not seek medical attention for it. Third or fourth, third, I might consider it. Fourth, obviously, I feel like I would need some assistance there. But then I knew that the odds of that happening with undisturbed birth and labor is quite unlikely. So again, a risk that I was willing to take. So yeah, anyway, we went to sleep and, you know, had a little cuddles and started breastfeeding and all these things. And I then got a call from the hospital at, I think it was like 8 a.m. that same day. So 6 hours postpartum. And they're like, so you're 40 weeks today. We've got an earlier appointment for your CTG, because then I had to go on daily CTGs. And I was like, I don't need to. It's okay. Baby was born. And this is the best conversation I've had in my life. Is the midwife goes, okay. Where did you have the baby? And I was like, at home. Oh, okay. And who attended it? Oh, you know, just me and my husband. And she's like, okay. And you're okay? Like, is everyone all right? And I was like, yeah, we're fine. And she's like, well, look, just let me just you know, call my nurse manager, and we'll just, you know, I'll call you back. I was like, sure. It was so funny. She calls me back again in hysterics and convinces me that I need to go into hospital because of my gestational diabetes. Baby might be hypoglycemic, so low blood sugar. And obviously for me, I was like, fair enough. I did research this, that this is a possibility. However, I was like, I feel baby's fine, but I'll do the quote unquote right thing and go in and have him checked out. Worst decision I made, because I had to then burst my postpartum bubble. We went down to the hospital and they proceeded to come up with excuses to keep us there for 12 hours before I decided to discharge against medical advice. They were doing serial blood sugar tests on him. Every time he would pass, and they'd be like, yeah, but he's still on the lower end. And I was like, yeah, but it's fine. Like, he's still breastfeeding and I feel fine. And they also, while I was there, convinced me to get my perineum checked out. Of course, I discovered I had a second-degree tear. And they were listing the reasons why I should get sutures. And I actually stopped the procedure halfway through. I was like, you guys need to stop. It's too painful. I feel like you're tearing me in half. And they were like, oh, yeah, but there is a tear there. And, you know, you got to make sure that it's sutured. And I was like, well, no. So then they got the OB to come and convince me to get sutures. And she was listing down the risks of not getting sutures. And list, turns to my husband, says, it can also impact your sexual function, turns back to me and continues listing her thing.
Oh, my God. Oh, God.
I know. And I mean, I don't think it impacted my sexual function, seeing as I've since had another baby, but but you know, that's just me.
Right.
Oh, goodness. So eventually, like I say, discharge against medical advice, because they were like, oh, we need to keep you overnight for this and that reason. And I was like, well, no, we're fine. We're going home. And that was the end of that. But it set me on a little bit of an interesting journey of why I started kind of advocating for evidence-informed but individual tailored practice. And yeah, so it's really interesting. I feel like I've talked forever and ever. So
that's great. I love it. I love how smooth your story just came out like that, because you are hanging on to so many details that are so important. And that fact right there, we're going to be best friends, because this is like the kind of birth talk that I love. Everything that you're hanging on to, and doing your research and talking about the comparisons of like how your providers are talking to you and all of that is so important. And you are extremely well informed with being a registered nurse and then also just having the desire to do research on your own to come up with these answers to your questions and then to tell the provider face to face, hey, yeah, I know exactly what study you're talking about. Yeah, that one. Yeah, absolutely. So that is amazing. And I love all of that for you. I loved how it all played out for you because there was a happy ending, right? And of course, there is risk to this, right? With free birth, there is risk. But from the sounds of it, you did your due diligence in making sure that you had a backup plan. You continue to go to care. You found your sweet spot and you followed through.
Yeah.
And I think that's great.
Thank you. No, I totally agree. And this is often what I tell some of my mum friends, because then they're like, oh, I could never do that. And I was like, I don't think everyone should free birth. And it's not as looking down at anyone else who has a different experience, sort of. I don't think everyone should. I think that when you decide to free birth, you take 100% responsibility for what happens. And some people don't want to take that, and that's okay. For me, I was like, absolutely, I want it. They called me a control freak, but I was like, absolutely, like, give that responsibility to me. And I agree. Yes, you do. I always say, if you decide to free birth, it shouldn't be from a place of fear. It should be from a place of informed empowerment. Like, you can't just go into it being like, just cause. It's a very natural process and our bodies were absolutely made for it. And I strongly believe most of our bodies won't create a baby that's too big to birth. But again, there are some things, like there were a couple of things that I made sure that I looked at, and this is obviously not medical advice at all, but these are the things that I looked out for. These were my red flags that I would transfer for, and it was a prolapsed cord. It was a transverse presentation, so hand first. It was copious amounts of bleeding to the point where I would feel unwell. My intuition was one of the criteria for transfer, is if my intuition said something's wrong. What was the other one? Oh, if I was fatigued, if I just couldn't do it anymore. And the very last one, sorry, I said last one before, but the last one was like foul smelling blood or mucus or anything like that. So for me, I was like, okay, if there's some meconium, that's okay. If baby's coming, if baby's not coming, then that's probably a reason to transfer as well. I had a whole list of things that we would look out for. But other than that, I was happy that everything else would be a variation of normal and we would take it as it comes. So that was my birth story with my first, and it was really, really cool. I was, like I say, very, very happy with it. Again, I did the buy the book thing and went to the child health nurses and all of the postpartum checks and all that. But a few weeks into my breastfeeding journey, I was like, something is amiss. Like, he's breastfeeding fine, he's gaining weight well, but there's something is missing. There's something not quite right. Like, my breastfeeding sessions are going for like 30, 40 minutes. Is this normal? And it wasn't cluster feeding. I was like, this doesn't quite, like, I was again very fortunate that I knew where to go look for information on how to breastfeed, because I'm again of the belief that breastfeeding is a very natural thing, but it doesn't mean that we all know how to breastfeed. Breastfeeding is a skill that you have to learn. And many women feel discouraged because they're like, oh, my body can't breastfeed. It's just, no, you just haven't learned the skill of breastfeeding yet. Breastfeeding's hard. It's very natural, but it's very hard. So that's something we can go into in a little bit. But I kept asking these providers, I was like, something's wrong. And they're like, no, something's not wrong. He's gaining weight. There's no nipple damage. Like, it's fine. And again, my intuition was like, no, there's something. I eventually, at 8 weeks old, so 2 months, I finally had a provider that was like, okay, fine, we'll check his mouth. We could not lift his lip, his front upper lip. So he had a very, very big lip tie. So once I had that revised, I'm not going to lie, I don't remember there being any major changes to his actual breastfeeding in terms of, some people are like, oh, I had the baby's lip or tongue tie release and I had a new baby. It wasn't quite the case for us, but I do remember the breastfeeding sessions went much shorter. And so I was again very fortunate that I have a very, very strong letdown to the point where baby goes, Yeah. So I think in many ways that kind of helped him thrive despite the fact that he had that tie. So I mean, looking back, I don't think that it was the thing that changed everything, but it was just kind of like that whole process that I went through of being told, no, he's fine, there's nothing wrong. And I kept thinking, there's something. And finally being recognized and being acknowledged for, hey, you're not just a crazy postpartum lady. Mm-hmm. So that kind of set me on the journey of starting my own practice of I want mums to be heard and listened to. And when their intuition is saying that there's something, that let's do some investigating together. Like, let's do it. Not just being like, oh, you fit the box of the hundreds of women that I've talked to and you're fine kind of thing. And that's not what I'm about.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I will also say, I think that is true for many people that decide to open up their own practice. They have an experience that they have personally been through or someone close to them has been through, and it really shifts their mindset on, wow, there's not many resources for this.
No, yeah.
Like the fact that we don't have anywhere close to enough research on what happens to the biological female body throughout pregnancy. Like we have ideas, but we need more research on what's going on because there's so much that's changing literally in our biology, in our brain, in our body. We are never the same.
No.
So it is so intriguing to me how deep you can truly go with this kind of stuff. So I really love that you opened up your own practice and getting the resources that you felt you needed postpartum to open up the intuitive parent, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. It became so clear to me that women who free birth, women who home birth, and even some women who birth in the hospital fall through the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's either because of it's a funding thing or it's because we just don't have the right systems in place to make sure that women are supported postpartum to establish their parenting journey. When I started my private practice, I was like, right, I need to provide there's support for women who are falling through the cracks, because I fell through the cracks and I still attended my provider appointments, bizarre.
I think it would be hard, honestly, for people to not feel like they haven't fallen through the cracks. Because for me, as a birth worker, the way that people, especially in hospital settings, care for their patients, it's so generalized because everybody fits under this big umbrella. All of these tests and things, they're absolutely necessary in some cases. But in the times that they're not necessary, and then you're like, okay, you pass this, you fit in this box. You don't pass this, you fit in that box.
Yeah.
And then another test determines which left or right they take next.
Yeah.
And it's just like checking off the boxes versus like sitting, hearing, and listening to the person that is like, hey, I'm feeling this in my body. Don't worry, you're fine. A lot of people feel that.
Yeah.
So I've never spoken to someone who hasn't felt like they've fallen through the cracks in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're in the public system here, at least in Australia, is even if you do get the help that you want, there's often a waiting time, a waiting list. And so by the time that you've got especially when it comes to breastfeeding, as one example, when it comes to such a time sensitive thing, if you're on a wait list, it doesn't really help, even if you didn't fall through the cracks. So that's why I started my private practice. And so that's why I decided, like, look, breastfeeding is awesome. It's very hard, but it's a skill that we need to learn. It's, I fell through the cracks. I couldn't get the help that I wanted. And thank goodness for the research that I was able to do and the information I was able to find and prepare myself for breastfeeding and what is correct positioning. I didn't know before I went into this research that there's a right way to hold a baby.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, to be fair, when I breastfeed my second born now, it's just whatever works. But
right.
When you're learning how to breastfeed the first time, if you've never done it, then it's a big mindset shift of how to latch a baby and how to actually check, are they latching properly? What isn't normal? And yeah, so it's just interesting. And I also focus on other areas, like, this shouldn't surprise you, but now that I went down the free birth path, of course, I went down the elimination communication path. If you've never heard of it, it's essentially potty training from birth, but it's less formal in that you're just fostering the baby's innate ability to communicate their toileting needs, just like the way that they communicate their feeding needs and their sleep needs and things like that. So I help parents with that. And also further onto that is non-coercive potty training. It's such a normal thing for us to go to the toilet. Everyone has to go to the toilet. So why are we attaching an outside incentive. It needs to be an internal thing. Like, I want to keep myself clean, so I go to the toilet. So the reason why I bring that up is I don't like the whole, I don't think that it helps to have things like potty training charts and things like that. It's an external motivator. The kid will only be going to the toilet because it's going to make you happy, not because it's good for their health. I just decided that, you know what, we need a holistic approach. We need some holistic approaches to our early parenthood. So things like establishing sleep routines. And I think we briefly talked about this before starting to record, is sleep training is a major thing that we use in our modern society to create quote unquote independence. Whereas in what I call intact cultures, so cultures where they might be considered less developed, they're attached to their children and the children are attached to their parents for years. And that, in my mind, in the research that I've read, that is the thing that fosters independence, healthy independence. So I help parents establish sleep routines and kind of sleep habits. And if you're the type of family that wants to co-sleep, okay, as a registered nurse, I do have to kind of do the disclaimer of this is what the official recommendations are, but let's see how we can support you doing what you want to do safely. Like, I co-sleep with my kids, and I wouldn't do it any other way. I sleep trained my first for a few months, and then it was incredibly stressful for everyone involved. It's stressful. Like, science has proven that a baby's cry unanswered causes stress hormones in the mum's body. Why would you put yourself through that on purpose? It's torture. Like, just yesterday we were in the car on the freeway and my baby was crying. She was so hungry, and I was like to my husband, I was like, you need to pull over right now. I'm like, this is putting me in major stress mode, man. You need to pull over. And so it's just, quick tangent there for you.
Speaking of your second one, we should talk about their conception. Yeah. And is it a boy, girl?
It's a little girl. Yeah, so she was a surprise. So I knew too much with my first. I always say I knew too much because I had so many scans. I wanted to do everything by the book. I had all the tests. And so this time I was like, no. We're not doing that again. So she was an oopsie, a happy oopsie, and that we wanted to start trying in March early this year for our second. I told my husband I really want to try naturally. I just want to try. Because, I mean, with my first pregnancy, the miscarriage that I'd had, that was natural. But then obviously at the time when we started trying for my first, I was a bit like unsure about the whole process because I'd had that miscarriage and because I had been told that I can't fall pregnant naturally, or I'm unlikely to fall pregnant naturally. So we never really tried. We just weren't careful, if that makes sense. I was still breastfeeding my first and I was starting to wean, and I was following, or I am now again, but I was following the fertility awareness method where I told my husband, like, look, there's a small chance I might be ovulating because my cycles come back, but also, it's all over the place because I am still breastfeeding. I was starting to track like my temperature and cervical mucus and things like that. So it was like a trifecta of things that we were looking at, is how much am I breastfeeding? What's my temperature doing? And what is the discharge going? And I was like, look, there's a small chance I might be ovulating. Now, I didn't mention this, but my husband works away 2 weeks at a time, and then he comes back for a week. He works on a mine site. And he's like, oh, but I've been away for 2 weeks, And I was like, sure, fine. And of course, I fell pregnant. And it was quite funny finding out that I was pregnant with her. Just the day before I tested, I was having a conversation with one of my really close girlfriends. And she said, because I was like, oh, like, I think I might be having some pregnancy symptoms. She's like, don't you do it. My hen's party is coming up because we both fell pregnant within 6 months of each other with the first go. And she's like, don't do it. Like, we haven't had a night together where we could just have some wine and have some fun. And I was like, yep, I agree. Like, it would be nice. And she's like, don't be pregnant, please. So the next morning I did a test, and of course I was very pregnant. It came up very, very quickly positive. And so I messaged her and I was like, you'll never guess what I just did. And she was like, no way. So anyway, obviously she wasn't actually angry, but it was just kind of a bit of the fact that we talked about it just the day before. The way I told my husband was, so he was dropped off by one of his colleagues from the airport, and we met gaming. So we're a bit nerdy in that sense. So I was playing some games and just unwinding for the night. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to finish this game and then I'll come join you and we can debrief and whatever for the week. When I found out I was pregnant, I was like, oh, like I need to keep this test so I can show him when he comes home. But then I also had a friend who was helping me clean the house and my mum come over that day. So I was like, okay, I'll just quickly like hide it in my vanity. He messages me a photo and he's like, do you have COVID?
Oh.
He was joking, but he was like, do you have COVID? And I ignored it because I was like, oh, no, like I wanted to see his reaction.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I go into the room and he's like, did you get my text? I was like, no. And he's like, you should check your phone. And I was like, nah, I did get the text. I know I don't have COVID. He's like, yeah, I know. But he thought that it was all planned because I had, in my rush to hide my pregnancy test, I'd hid it in his basket and not in my basket. So when he went to shave his beard, of course, he found that pregnancy test. But yeah, so anyway, he was like, oh, I thought you were saying that you were playing your game. So I thought I would play a game and send you that COVID photo.
And here's how Jackson felt when he found out about both pregnancies.
I was very excited. So it was a bit of effort. We went through ovulation induction. So it wasn't as surprising as I guess most others. But yeah, no, I was very excited. And then the second one was more of a surprise. Jeanelle was planning a big reveal, but then I found out by accident. So again, very exciting. And that one was a bit more surprising. I thought she had done it on purpose because I work fly in, fly out, and I usually come back and shave because I haven't shaved for 2 weeks. So she'd left it on my shaving stuff. And I thought, oh, she's done it on purpose as a bit of a prank. But it turns out she was she just kept it there, trying to hide it.
Anyway, so, we were like, okay, we're happy, we're excited, but she is quite literally going to be coming 6 months earlier than we would have liked, which meant 2 under 2. It was a very similar pregnancy in many ways, in like symptoms wise, except I kept saying like I felt like my symptoms started earlier. They were much earlier. And I was like, I'm very lucky in that I don't have major, like I don't actually get sick in the first trimester. I'm extremely sensitive to smell, very gaggy. With my second, I was so sensitive that even the aircon smell and the gust of air from an aircon would put me off into like a gagging, like, But then again, very, very fortunate that I don't actually get sick, so to speak. And then, I have an old back injury from my nursing that flares up with all my pregnancies from the look of it. And again, all of that just started earlier this time around. But because I had my experience with the system and GD, I declined many of the tests. So I, again, still wanted to, because I knew I would free birth this time, I was like, why would I go back to the system? I still wanted a record of my pregnancy and I still wanted to see a midwife. I still wanted to get the belly measurements and the blood tests for me and stuff like that, just to make sure that I'm okay, especially iron-wise and whatnot. So I saw a community midwife who, she doesn't attend births. She just monitors your pregnancy and then checks in with you postpartum. And that's pretty much it. And she was like, are you going to do the GD test? I was like, nah. I was like, you know what? I'll just assume that I've got it and I'll make sure that I'm exercising, make sure that I'm eating okay, but I'm not going to stress over it. I'm not going to lie, there were a couple of moments throughout pregnancy where I was like, oh, like maybe I should test. Like, what if baby is like really just big bellied and they will get stuck and stuff like that? And I was like, you know what? No, my body will do what it needs to do. And we know the risks, we know the things to look out for, and that'll be okay. I originally didn't want any scans. However, at about 12 weeks, I got some spotting. And I thought, oh no, I might be miscarrying again. And so I did go to the hospital and they scanned and saw that baby was definitely not 12 weeks. Baby was like 6, maybe max 8 weeks. And so I was like, oh no, what's happening? Because I could still detect heartbeat and stuff. So I went for a proper dating scan a few weeks later and they were like, oh, okay, we'll just change the dates. Your dates are slightly off. By slightly, I mean 5 weeks. So I ended up actually being 7 weeks when I had that spotting. So they put it down to implantation bleeding. So, that was one of those things that I was like, okay, fair enough. I did go in because they were like, oh, it might be a miscarriage type thing where you don't have an actual proper miscarriage where you're bleeding, but baby's not viable, like maybe it's passed away or whatever. and then your body just retains. So you might need intervention. Whereas luckily that wasn't the case for me. So I was very, very grateful. And then again, I was like, okay, right, like that, no more scans. And then my husband was like, oh, I would like just for us to do the 20-week scan, make sure everything's fine. And I agreed to that and everything was fine. So it was just such a different experience where I don't regret those scans, but it was just so different where I didn't have to get to these appointments every 4 weeks. I wasn't told every 4 weeks that your blood sugars are slightly high or, your baby is big or any of that. And I just felt so much calmer in this pregnancy. I mean, running after a toddler, of course, it's a lot busier, but it was lots less stressful as a pregnancy overall. I didn't know that this was normal until I started talking to second-time mums. I felt a lot more disconnected to baby because I felt guilty that I couldn't spend so much headspace on connecting with baby, like, oh, baby, how are you? Like I could, when I wanted a nap with the first, I could go down for a nap. I could be like, hey, baby, how you doing in there? It was just so different, such a different experience. The midwife that I had, she is so beautiful in that she kept offering the test. She's like, would you like this test? This is why we recommend this test. And I could say yes or no. And it was just, I had so much more say, I felt, in the process. I was so much more involved in the decision-making process of what tests I should and would take. Some I declined and some I accepted. And the difference that it made, it was huge to my confidence and also just to my satisfaction, I guess, for care that I was receiving. And so obviously I was planning my free birth the whole way and again, refresh my memory of like, why do I want to do what I want to do? And I had this with my first, but I definitely, obviously is much fresher, more fresh in my mind is the fears of what if something goes wrong? And again, this is such a normal experience that women think that something must be wrong because they're having this thought. I again believe and think that it's just our bodies and our minds preparing each other for what is to come. It is a life-changing experience. And there's just this cocktail of hormones that's going on. It's just so cool. And I just reminded myself, like, look, this is why I do what I do. I feel safest to labor in my own space and to be surrounded by people that I love and that I know care for me. And I know what to do if something should go wrong. We have a plan in place. And it was just kind of that reaffirmation over and over again of like, we're okay. We don't need rescuing.
Right.
So with baby number 2, I had Braxton Hicks from like 28 weeks. And I was like, oh my goodness. The thought of Braxton Hicks gave me Braxton Hicks. Towards the end there, I was like, oh man, like I'm never going to go into labor because this is insane. And, oh, by the way, I should just say I don't know if I mentioned that my first came exactly on his due date, 40 and 0, which is just cool. Like my body knew exactly when he needed to come. But anyway, so with this one, I had like really regular niggles is what I call them. I call it my niggles Friday because it was on a Friday morning that I was having these niggles and I was like, these are a little bit more intense than the ones that I have been having. I was about 37 and a bit weeks. So I was term technically, but I was a bit early. But I was like, right, I'm in labor. Let's go, everybody. It was the Friday before my husband had to fly out for work. So we were like, okay, he's either going to fly out and not be here for the birth or this is not labor. And because what kept happening was it would get intense and then it would fizzle out. It would get intense and then it would fizzle out. And I was like, no way. Like, I don't want my husband to miss this. I don't want to be here alone with my toddler. Like, it was actually a stressful day. And my husband was like, well, are you going into labor? And I was like, I don't know. I feel like given the chance it could. And I didn't go into labor. It fizzled out. And at that point, we were like, okay, so it's too late for you to fly out now. So he actually postponed his fly out date to the next Tuesday. And we're like, okay, if nothing happens over the weekend, he will fly out. And nothing happened over the weekend. So we get to Tuesday and I was like, look, the thought of you not being here, that stresses me out a little bit. Like I do want that support. And so we decided that he would start his leave then. So he started his leave 2 weeks earlier than we had originally planned. But it was the best decision that we made because we had 2 weeks of just being able to spend so much time with the firstborn, with each other, and it was just a really good like transition from family of 3 to family of 4 because we were wanting to spend as much time together postpartum because with our first, my husband had to go back to work within 2 weeks. So we only had 2 weeks postpartum, whereas this time I was like, oh, I want the full 6-week experience. And we're like, okay, it's okay. Like, we'll just sacrifice a little bit of time before baby's here. So he is here for the birth and the labor. It was like a high risk, high reward, as in he goes away and she doesn't come before he's flown back and he gets to spend the whole period of time away, or it's a low risk, lower reward in that we might lose a couple of weeks. So we ended up, quote unquote, it wasn't really losing because I think it was well spent, but we lost essentially about 10 days because I then went into established labor or proper labor on, I think I was 39 and 3 or 4. We're like 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. in the morning that day. I kind of woke up to, again, my Friday niggles labor, because like what happened after that point, it was a major mindset shift. Leading up until that point of my Friday niggles, I was okay to be pregnant for 43 weeks. I was like, I could do this forever. Like, it's okay. The thought of my baby coming put my body into baby needs to be here now. I was like, it needs to happen now. I was so impatient those last 2 weeks. I was like, oh man, like, you can't just threaten to come and then not come. Like, what are you doing to me? I was like, okay, actually, this might be it, but also I don't know. So we went down to the markets and caught up with some friends, and there were a couple contractions where I was like, I wonder if this is a contraction or if this is a Hicks. I don't know. Again, because the thought of Braxton Hicks was giving me Braxton Hicks. Like, seriously, I'd be walking and then suddenly I would actually have to stop and breathe through it. And then obviously it would be nothing for like the next few hours. So, and that was like early in pregnancy. Unfortunately, that day we also had a wake to go to. And so I was like, right, I'm going to go down for a nap while the toddler's napping, and we'll see how I go afterwards, if this is actually the real deal or not. Because I hadn't lost my mucus plug. I hadn't had regular contractions or anything like that. I was just like, these just feel, again, a little bit more intense than the previous weeks leading up to it. And I woke up from my nap half an hour later and told my husband, look, I don't think I slept. I think I might be in labor. He was like, okay, that's okay. We'll see what happens. When the toddler wakes up, we'll decide whether you're going to go to the wake with us or if we'll just go without. And it picked up after that. So within the next half an hour, I lost my mucus plug. I then started having more regular contractions, and I was like, actually, I need to start moving through these contractions. This is labor. So we decided I would stay home. Them two would go to the wake, and I would let them know if anything happens, if we need any help, or if I need any help or whatever. Otherwise, they would go for half an hour, and then come back, and that'll be the end of it. So at 2:15, I had already stripped down same as with the first. So I was like, I lost my pants and I lost my shirt. And next minute I was like, right, I need to get in the shower. And I knew I needed to get into the shower, and I knew I was close to transition when I felt nauseous. And so this was 2:15 p.m. And I messaged my husband and said, you need to come home. I think baby's going to come soon. So he obviously just got to the wake, like quite literally. I think he got there like 15 minutes prior, and he's starting to greet everyone and mourning our loved one, and then having to kind of pick up and come home to some intensity. So I got into the shower after I texted him and lost track of time, where I was in there like a wild animal. I kid you not. I remember kind of like pacing around in there going, I'm thirsty, like I want water. And I was like talking to myself like, I want. And I just couldn't get it out of my mind. And I was just like left and right. I was like, oh wait, there's water here. And I'm like, like just open mouth under the shower, just drinking this water. Seriously, it was wild. It was feral a little bit. And I was like, and then I started having these thoughts of anger and frustration towards my husband. I was like, the whole point of him staying, not going to work was so that he's here with me. And I was like, I think I'm in transition. And then I had this fear of, oh my goodness, I'm going to have this baby alone. Like, oh no, like I'm going to be, and I was like, you're still in transition, Jeanelle. And it was really, really cool to have that kind of perspective of, I'm having these thoughts and these emotions, these ebbs and flows of whatever was happening. But then at the same time, I was able to kind of briefly step back from them and kind of go, like this is where we're at. Like we're progressing. We're fine. My husband gets home and he's like, how you going? And I was like, yeah, good. I'm going to start pushing soon. And I meant the next contraction. And he thought within the next hour or two. So my man goes and he's like, right, I'm going to go get the birth pool ready. And I remember kind of yelling out after him, like, I'm not moving. He didn't hear me. So the toddler stays with me in the bathroom, which was totally fine. He was just kind of watching, like Mummy's having her shower. She's making some noises. We had been preparing him with a book, a beautiful book, a free birth book of like labor. And so it's got like, this is a placenta. Mama's going to make these noises. This is what the baby looks like. Here's the umbilical cord. Like, it was really, really cool book. And so he was like, oh, Mama's making noises. And I had my first, we'll call it my pushing contraction. And this was one thing that I wanted to do differently from my labor, from my first to my second, was I felt that I was too impatient with the pushing stage with the first. So with this one, it was really my goal that if I had that capacity to remind myself not to just go straight into pushing as soon as I have a pushing sensation, and just kind of trying my best to breathe through it and just kind of let my body push. I really wanted that, because I really felt that if I had just that little bit of patience towards the end there, I might not have torn. And like I said before, tearing wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just my intuition was, I think if I was just a little bit more patient, who knows? So anyway, so that was one thing that I wanted to do differently, was to allow my body to do the pushing, the most of the pushing. Again, my waters hadn't broken yet or burst yet. So when I felt that pushing sensation, I was like, oh, like that is quite a big pressure in my perineum. So I kind of reached down and I could feel the waters bulging. And then between contractions, the waters would go back up again, just normal, in and out, in and out. But so that was the first one. The second one, same thing, waters bulging. And at that point, the water was annoying me. So I turned the water off, and my toddler thinks Mummy's done having her shower. And he opens the shower door, which lets in a very cold gush of air. And I said, close the door. The poor toddler obviously is completely shook by the fact that I had just yelled at him. And he is running out of the bathroom, which then is intercepted by my husband, who comes running in, having been struggling in the background with trying to get the hose attached into the birth pool and trying to get all that sorted. Had only filled up about 5 centimeters or whatever. Comes in running, and as he comes in running, and like the toddler is like, shuddering. Third contraction, she comes out. So she hadn't crowned yet, so she comes back in. Waters burst. I feel her turn, and she just comes flying out. So it was this 3 things happening all at once, where husband's running in the door, toddler is like, what the hell? And the baby has just gone, right, I am just going to be flying out like Superman, and just turns. And I remember just feeling I felt her turn, and I was like, oh my goodness, like she must have crowned. But then I reached out again, there was just water there, turns, and then comes flying out. And it was just like there's all these things happening at once, and baby was here. And I hadn't known that she was a girl until she was born. I look at her and I'm like, I can see you trying to breathe. Why can't you breathe? And I realized, there's this thing called an umbilical cord, and quickly unwrapped that. And then she took a breath, and she was just, again, sharing her voice with the world. And husband is calming the toddler and kind of coming to terms with, there's a baby here. And postpartum, he was like, I was there for 15 minutes before baby was born. So he came home with 15 minutes to spare. And yeah, within, again, 20 minutes of baby being born, placenta came, and it was just so fast. So her labor was 3.5 hours from established labor until baby was born, 3.5 hours. And so it was very, very quick.
Now here is the point of view of the births from Jackson.
The first one was, I guess, more typical. Took I think about 8 hours. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, it was very, very cool, the whole process. And the second one, I was hardly there for it. It was a bit of a rush, so I didn't even have time to think. I was just running over, and then there's a baby. I knew it was quicker, like subsequent times, but I didn't think it was going to be that quick.
It was really, really cool in that we were alone in many ways. Like I could just kind of go through the laboring motions, and there was a proper free birth in that there was actually no one there. That was the second one. It was just, I'm still processing it because it was so fast.
And you're only 8 weeks postpartum.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, and how quickly that has gone, I cannot begin to tell you.
How are you doing now? How are you feeling postpartum? How's your body feeling? How's the toddler handling being a big sibling?
Yeah. So I didn't tear. So that was one thing. And I just put it down to the fact that I was able to breathe through those early pushing contractions, even though I only had 3. But then also day 1 or 2 postpartum, I said to myself, I was like, I feel great. Like, I don't want to get out of bed, but I feel great. And I just felt so nurtured because we really did a lot of preparation for the postpartum, because I said I really wanted to be looked after, because the first time I felt the need to get up and do the things. And in many ways, I had to within 2 weeks because my husband had to go back to work. And so this time I was like, I really want to feel looked after and pampered, and I want to just have no sort of pressure to have to hand my baby over to anyone if just because they want to hold them. I just want our bubble for as long as I can. We did our very best to foster that. So my husband was in charge of organizing visits. So we only did 1 visit a day. He would always be like ushering them out the door, and like, you've overstayed now. Especially my family, bless them, they're beautiful, but can be a bit up close and personal sometimes, and overstay their welcome. So a couple of times we're like, I think we're gonna go have a nap now, and so it was really good in that way. We were much better prepared this time around, where we had a meal train set up this time, and I really wanted to make sure I was having those warm, nurturing foods, and didn't really follow it to the T, but kind of brought in elements of the Ayurvedic kind of approach to postpartum nutrition and principles. And it's been an interesting transition, because during pregnancy, I felt a little bit disconnected from baby. And then immediately postpartum also felt disconnected from baby. And I was kind of like, am I going into the depression side of things? Like, I was just overanalyzing it. Like, I definitely didn't have that very big emotional response to baby number 2 being born. And I was like, maybe it's because my labor went really quick, or maybe it was because I didn't feel connected during pregnancy. But I just realized it was because your attention is divided, and that's normal. A few weeks later, I was like, I don't think that I would be feeling as connected to baby that I do now if I didn't have those first few weeks of really protected time. And I think that is so important for myself, and I guess for future, if there should be any future babies, is you do need that time to connect with baby, because the reality is your attention is divided. And it's not because you love baby any less. It's just because you already have a relationship with your firstborn, and you forget what it's like I forgot what it's like to have to build this whole new relationship. It's like meeting a whole new person. You don't just know them because you carried them. And some women have the privilege of having that, but not everyone does, and it's okay. So I think the postpartum period was very, very vital. That support wise, preparation wise, bonding wise. The toddler, he's got his moments. Some days he is so loving towards her, and he's like, I want to touch her, and I want to cuddle her, I want to hold her. And then the next minute he'll just go throwing hands. And I think it's a little bit of, sometimes I think it's a bit of cuteness aggression. Sometimes I think it's a bit of jealousy. But I keep being told by mums who've had more than the 2 that is normal. It's okay for that to happen. It does pass. So I'm holding out for that at the moment, but otherwise, I think we're going okay.
Good. Jeanelle, it is so awesome to hear your stories, and talking about the entirety of your pregnancy and birth with your son, and then touching on your business and what inspired you to create the Intuitive Parent, and then being able to go and dive into the birth of your daughter. I think that's so awesome. I'm so thankful that you were open to sharing your stories, and I only have 3 final closing questions for you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay. So my first question is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to all pregnant people to prepare for labor, birth, and postpartum?
Ooh. Can I tell my stories again? No, I kid. Look, I think that one thing that I said earlier, and I want to say that again, is making decisions out of fear. It's dangerous. Whether you are in a hospital setting or a private setting or a free birth setting, making decisions out of fear is dangerous. So whenever you're making a decision, make sure that you're doing it from a point of, I have educated myself, I have sought opinions, and I mean plural, and that you're doing it from a place of empowerment and feeling peace about your decision. If you feel like something's off, you need to listen to intuition. I called my business The Intuitive Parent because I believe intuition is not necessarily always 100% on the money, but there's always some merit to it. And you always do need to kind of go, let's ask some more questions. Let's investigate a bit further. So that's definitely my number one is listen to that intuition and make your decisions from a point of empowerment, not out of fear.
I love that. I think that's incredibly important because it is incredibly true. Making your own decision based off of what you've learned yourself versus what other people are shoving down your throat or into your ears. So,
absolutely.
And here's Jackson's advice for partners.
Listen would be a good one. You can't force someone to do something. If they want to go to the hospital, you shouldn't force them not to, vice versa. Yeah, offering input but not forcing it would be a good one.
So my next question is, what is one resource that I can share with my listeners on your behalf?
So I do have, for locals, I'm starting up a play group where we are sharing basically just from an evidence point of view. We're having some great conversations with mums around their journey in early postpartum or prenatal or early parenthood, essentially, but then also creating a space for the kids to play. But I guess for those who aren't local, I help with all things early parenthood, and we just have some really great conversations around where are you at right now and how can I help? And if I can't help, then that's fine. I offer free 15-minute calls where if you've got like one question, like a rapid fire question, then I'm happy to help you answer that. Or we just have a bit of a chat, a bit of a troubleshoot and see what are the next steps that you need to take to achieve what you want to achieve, whether that is returning to work whilst breastfeeding or establishing breastfeeding or learning how to breastfeed, or even, when you're starting to look at starting solids is, doing your anaphylaxis and choking and CPR training. I do offer those virtually, which is pretty cool, just to be able to empower mums and dads and parents in general of this is what you need to do should something happen. And again, when you get to the major milestones of potty training and wanting to learn more about EC, I love talking about all things early parenthood. So even just having a chat, I have a really cool Facebook group called The Intuitive Parent. So you're welcome to join that as well. But yeah, otherwise, I really just take this as a very, very casual but vital approach to early parenthood, really.
Love it. I love it. There's so much that can be unpacked in what you offer as resources. There's a lot of pathways that you can go through in order to get that support. So I think that's really great.
Oh, I should mention that the website is www.theintuitiveparent.com.au.
And I'll make sure that link is in the show notes for this episode as well.
Fantastic.
Now, my final question for you is, if you could describe each of your births with one word, what would it be?
Oh, man. I should have thought about this before. The first one, I would say freeing is freeing in very many ways. And the second, I would say, was powerful. Definitely. And I don't know if you want me to explain why, but yes.
It's totally up to you. I feel like we have a good idea as to why you would put both of those words to your stories, especially after hearing them. I think that they fit incredibly well. Not that it's my position to say whether or not they fit your stories, but I can absolutely see why you would choose those words. And here are the words that Jackson chose.
First one, I've been thinking about this one for a while. It's a hard one. Gonna go a bit cliche. I'll say magical. It was a whole experience. Just watching Jeanelle go through all those stages of labor and then meeting Michael. And then the second one, I'm gonna have to go quick. It was quick, very fast. Yeah, it was cool.
Now it's time to wrap up this interview. Jeanelle, thank you so much for sharing your stories with me. I am so excited to just have my listeners hear this because, one, you're in Australia. A lot of my listeners are in the US. So hearing what it's like to birth in a different country is amazing. And also, birth happens everywhere. So I love hearing from you. So thank you.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome. We talked about this just before, is us both loving talking about birth. We could be here for hours, and it's just such an honor to be able to do that. It's so cool. And being exactly like you said, being able to do it from across the other side of the world, it's so cool.
Yes. And thank you for waking up so incredibly early, because right now for me, as I'm recording this, it is 3:52 p.m., but I think it's like almost 7 a.m. your time.
Yeah, it's about 8 minutes to 7 a.m.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
So 6:52.
Yeah. And so you were up really, really early. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for that sacrifice.
Thank you. Absolutely. Well, do it again.
Okay, Baki family, let's be real. This episode was amazing. The fact that we got to include the partner as well as the birth video audio, oh my gosh, I am so obsessed. This episode took some more editing power, but I really truly loved the incorporation of the birth video audio as well as the partner voice. So if you liked that too, let me know, and I will be sure to continue to reach out to partners and see if people will allow me to use their birth video audio. I feel like it just really brings you and pulls you into the birth space with the storyteller. Now, Jeanelle and Jackson, I want to thank you both so much for sharing your stories and perspectives with me, because I am so happy to share your story, and I am so honored to be able to be a person that you felt safe enough to share your story with. So thank you so much, and I know that the Baki listeners also appreciate it. And for those listening now, if you want to see the show notes for this episode, you can head over to birthasweknowitpodcast.com/76. If you enjoyed this episode, I suggest that you also check out episode 42 with Ashley Winning. In that episode, she shares her unassisted home birth with her third child after 2 cesareans. She is also located in Australia. So tune into that one right after this. And if you want to become part of the Baki family on Facebook, you can go to birthasweknowitpodcast.com/community. I would truly love to see you there and to chat about episodes just like this one and to get a perspective on what you think should be coming next. So stay tuned, and I hope to hear from you there. Let's connect again soon. Bye for now.